This video contains mature content. Viewer discretion is advised. My name is Aaron Sokoloff, and on this episode of Brought Down, we discuss Aileen Wuornos and her lasting legacy on America. Aileen Carol Wuornos was born on February 29, 1956, in Rochester, Michigan. When Wuornos was young, her father was tried and convicted for child molestation. Many serial killers experience abuse at the hands of their parents, and Wuornos was no different. Wuornos was believed to have had antisocial personality disorder and borderline personality disorder. She was also classified as a psychopath with a PCLR score of 32. To the people that knew her, Wuornos was a troubled young woman. Many people have attributed her behaviors to her father's abuse and her own mental health issues. Wuornos was forced to live with her grandfather after her dad was sent off to prison. However, her grandfather did not treat her well. When she was only 15 years old, Wuornos' grandfather kicked her out of the house. Now that Aileen was homeless, she had nowhere left to turn. She started working the streets at the young age of 15 in order to support herself and her basic needs. Wuornos also turned to petty crimes as another method of income. Along the way, she picked up, robbed, and then murdered 7 men. But what led her to this point? The first murder occurred on December 1st, 1989. The victim was named Richard Mallory. He was 51 years old. His body was located 12 days after his abandoned car was discovered. He was shot 3 times at close range, and then his body was disposed of. Wuornos' second murder victim was named David Spears. He was 43 years old. It occurred on June 1st, 1990. He was shot 6 times in the torso at close range. At this point, Wuornos was starting to get more comfortable with this hobby of hers. Was this going to become her new life? Killing innocent men and then robbing them? On June 6, 1990, the body of her third victim was found in Pasco County. Charles Carskadon, a 40-year-old rodeo worker, was found shot 9 times at close range. The bullets came from a small caliber weapon. The Damsel of Death's fourth victim was discovered in a wooded area on August 4th, 1990. Troy Burris's body was found badly decomposed and had 2 bullet wounds in it. By now, the Damsel of Death was settling into her new routine. She would seduce, rob, and murder men. Then, she would wait for the investigation to die down and repeat her actions. Charles Humphreys was Wuornos' 5th victim. His body was discovered on September 12, 1990. He was shot 6 times in the head and torso. He was a former police chief. Walter Gino Antonio was Wuornos' 6th victim. His body was discovered on November 19, 1990, after being shot 5 times in the back. His abandoned car was discovered a few days after his body was. The Damsel of Death would strike one final time. Wuornos' final victim is believed to have been 65-year-old Peter Symes. His abandoned car was discovered on July 4th, 1990. However, his body was never recovered. But how was Aileen Wuornos brought down? Like many other serial killers, Wuornos developed a pattern she became comfortable with. This is also known as an MO. The Urban Dictionary defines an MO as the following. Modus operandi is a Latin phrase approximately translated as method of operating. The term is used in English to describe somebody's habits or manner of working. Wuornos had a very specific MO. She would seduce her victims under the pretense that she was a prostitute. She would then drive to a secluded area with them, shoot them, and take their money and other valuables. After the murder, she would dispose of the bodies and abandon their cars. An MO will often help investigators identify when they're dealing with career criminals and serial killers. Wuornos also had a preferred type of victim, just like many other serial killers. She would pick older white men who seemed like they had money. Despite everything you've heard so far, Wuornos was not perfect. She messed up quite a bit and left a solid trail of evidence that allowed the investigators to track down the infamous serial killer. During the 7th and final murder, there were several witnesses. But what did those people see? Was it a violent act of pure evil? No, it was a drunken mistake. A car accident where 2 young women ditched beer cans in the bushes and fled together. Little did they know one of those women was a serial killer. Wait, didn't Wuornos act alone? Well, yes, but not this time. This time she had an accomplice with her, and her name was Tyria Moore. She was Wuornos' girlfriend. Eventually, Moore would cut a plea deal with the prosecutors in exchange for full immunity. All Moore had to do was get a confession from Wuornos. We'll come back to this at a later point, as it was the main argument for the prosecution. For now, let's talk about the other evidence against Wuornos. A witness from the car accident was able to help police come up with a composite sketch of both Wuornos and Moore. This would help lead to their eventual arrest. Wuornos pawned many of her victims' personal belongings to make some quick cash. Along the way, she left her fingerprints on the items, which were later traced back to the owners and eventually the murders. In addition to the fingerprints on the items she pawned, she also left behind her fingerprints in the car. In addition to the fingerprints, investigators found something else in the abandoned cars. Wuornos' DNA was on cigarette butts she left behind. Enter Tyria Moore. When Moore saw the sketches, she left Wuornos and went back to her family in Pennsylvania. This crushed Wuornos. She was absolutely heartbroken. Wuornos turned to another one of her favorite pastimes, binge drinking. She was a well-known alcoholic. Drinking is about all Wuornos did up until the time of her arrest. Wuornos was arrested on January 9, 1991, after a successful undercover operation at a biker bar Wuornos was living at. 2 days later, Moore was tracked down and arrested in Scranton, Pennsylvania. This is when the plea deal comes into play. Investigators told Moore they needed her help. They were going after the bigger caller. If she agreed, they would have the prosecution grant her full immunity. Not wanting to spend the rest of her life in prison, Moore agreed. She made regular calls to Wuornos, who was in jail at the time. Moore convinced Wuornos that she was still in love with her even after running off. She also convinced Wuornos that the investigators were going to ruin Moore's life and her family members' lives. Moore convinced Wuornos that she was going to be blamed for the murders as well as Wuornos. Moore even went as far as to say that she would kill herself before being convicted. Wuornos was not going to let that happen to Moore. She confessed to 6 of the 7 murders. She did not confess to the 7th because she knew the body was never recovered. She did help Moore though, just not in the way she had imagined she would. It took Wuornos over 3 hours to confess. The long trial following Wuornos' confession took place in January of 1992. The story doesn't end there, though. There were so many insane moments during the trial that I would need a whole separate video just to talk about them all. Here's a quick recap of just a few of them. Wuornos claimed that the 6 brutal murders she confessed to were all in self-defense. Wuornos told a witness that she hoped them and their entire family would be. After the verdict was announced and the jury was dismissed, Wuornos made an obscene gesture at the judge and cursed out the jury. What was the verdict? Aileen Wuornos was sentenced to death for the murders on January 27th of 1992. On October 9, 2002, Wuornos was executed via lethal injection in Florida State Prison at the age of 46, but she did leave her mark on the world. She was the first ever female serial killer identified by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Last meal and last words. Wuornos declined to have a last meal. However, she certainly did not decline to have her last words. She has some of the most disturbing last words of any American death row inmate in history. Wuornos' infamous quote, "I'd just like to say I'm sailing with the Rock, and I'll be back like Independence Day with Jesus June 6th, like the movie Big Mothership and all. I'll be back." So was Wuornos this vile serial killer with no remorse and no respect for life? Or was she an innocent woman with mental illness who was thrown into this horrible situation which no human should have to face alone? I'll let you decide. This has been Brought Down, Aileen Wuornos. My name is Aaron Sokoloff. Thanks for listening.